man. Man. Well, how could I say this? Mind if I introduce you? And I'll be honest, like I feel like even my introduction is gonna fall short because of all the stuff that you've done. You know, not to sound negative, but you've done so much, man. Like seriously, it's just like, how could I even put that into one paragraph? I can't. So you guys, you don't realize who is on the screen right here. This man has done so much. Like he is an icon. This brother right here, I mean, he's so much of an icon to where like the Austin Art Foundation gave 28 days to pay tribute to his whole musical life. This brother right here, I mean, he's done everything. Like he was the first cat in Texas doing this glam rock thing, and probably like pretty much the only black like glam rock dude out there, and just he established, you know, he had a hand in establishing the Black Rock Coalition. I mean, shoot, he's done things like, I mean, he was honored by the city of Austin in 1998 because of his cultural significance by Mayor Kirk Watson for 25 years of contribution. And then they inducted him into the Texas Museum in 2010. I mean, Texas Museum of Music in 2010. Man, there's so much stuff. I mean, he's the founder of Devoy Ltd. It's like, I mean, I'm gonna have him explain that because there's a bunch of other things that he founded under that as well. Man, and he's also right now, I mean, actually, it's almost 2 years that he's had a hand in the School of Rock and basically giving the real roots education, the deep roots of rock and roll, which I'm, as an educator myself, I'm just like, wow. I mean, there's so much stuff that I could say about Bevis Griffin, but we're going to do the interview because, like, I feel like, you know, thank you, man. I really appreciate you.
Well, all I can say is I'm honored to be here with you. I really appreciate your, you know, dedicated enthusiasm to advancing the Black rock culture. And I love the fact that we're like a generation once removed, you know. So your take on this whole situation is a fresh perspective, you know, from a lot of my contemporaries, so to speak. But I don't want to pontificate because, you know, this thing in front of my face works. And I don't necessarily want to take you off of your trajectory. So I know you probably got a head full of gas. So let's get it popping. What do you want to know?
Man, the first thing I want to know, you're an Angelino like me. Even if you're in Texas, you're still an Angelino. Dave is too, man. Dave's an Angelino, so he knows what's up.
Oh,
Dave.
East 74th Street on the east side between Wadsworth and McKinley. You know, my adjoining streets were like Florence, Avalon, and Central Avenue were like my district, you know, going all the way back to the 50s, right? Back before Bloods and Crips, we were Slossons back in the day.
Man.
Yeah.
Slossons were deep too. Dude, the Slossons.
But again, you know, that was a little bit above my weight class. You did what I mean? But when I was a shorty, that was what time it was. The Slosson S was in full effect. I was close to Fremont High School.
Oh wow. Raymond Washington.
I went to 79th Street Elementary School, and I went to Edison Junior High.
Wow.
Yeah. And then my parents separated in 66 after the Watts riot.
Oh wow.
And I relocated to Texas in 66 to resume my high school curriculum, and graduated from Wichita Falls High School in 1970. But the core of my book project that I've been developing for the past few years it's called The Memoirs of a Black Rock Maverick.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, but yeah, please go on about that.
I wanted to basically get some perspective, you know, in the zeitgeist with regard to the evolution of like contemporary rock music and its peripheral influences and what I call counter influences on black culture because it's really kind of a paradox insofar as, black musicians are the core founders of the rock and roll movement, so to speak. Of course, you had white participants as well, right? But we're talking about the Jerry Lee Lewises and the Elvis Presleys. All these people were influenced by black musicians, to take the direction that they took with regard to their commercial endeavors, And it's a beautiful story. I mean, I do really want to, state that I'm not really into the polemics, for it's a music thing. It's not a black white thing per se, right? It's just the fact that we have historically been sublimated, throughout history, through all of our, significant humanitarian achievements and accomplishments. Black people have been subjugated just horrendously over the course of, the past 2 centuries, and we're just now starting to see some movement in the zeitgeist with regard to understanding the fact that, our culture is immense and it's profoundly uh, diverse, and, without going off onto a tangent into so-called global
No,
cultural history.
please do. I want you to.
Well, the downside of that is we really don't have that sort of time, and I want to kind of give you the expanse of your platform, to really kind of check the boxes that really tickle your fancy, so to speak, right? But I'm just saying, in retrospect, you have to understand I'm 70 years old.
Man, awesome.
April. I was born in 1953. So from childhood to the point to where I was about ready to start kindergarten was the era where rock and roll truly blossomed. And I was fortunate because I had two young, you know, liberal parents. They were kind of hip. They were. My dad was a barber, had a barber shop down at between 51st and 52nd on Broadway, and adjacent to his barber shop was a really famous Chitlin circuit. We call them Chitlin circuit nightclubs because it was basically a showcase for the R&B and blues stars of the era. The 5-4 ballroom. You can check it out on the internet. It's a landmark. It's an institutional historical landmark because this was a spot that routinely showcased uh, all of the hit makers of the era. And I'm talking about people from B.B. King, Bobby Mann, Ike and Tina Turner,
Wow.
And on and on and on, right? And my dad knew a lot of these people because he had the barbershop on the block, right? So the musicians would at the barbershop, obviously, because they wanted to get clean and fresh, not just for the shows, but my dad was a hustler. And he had like after hours gambling activities going on after hours, after sets and things like that. And be, card and crap games, popping, cats shooting pool and whatnot for money, playing shooting dice, the hustle was flowing, right? And as a little kid, I'm innocuous to, the ramifications of all that. That's just my dad and my dad's friends. Middle name is Melvin. His name is Melvin. Melvin's barbershop. I'm little Melvin, you know what I mean? And it's just like, I spent a great deal of time in the daytime with my pop as opposed to going to a traditional daycare or something like that, right? So my mother used to work for boys' grocery markets, and she was a grocery store manager there. So I spent most of my pre-school time at my dad's shop in the environment of these musicians.
Wow.
Whatnot. That's where I really essentially kind of got the bug for it because, you know what it's like when you're in a barber shop and then you got your barber son is right there, and he's little, he's cute, whatever. It's like, let me take him down to the club. He can watch us rehearse for a little while, or this, that, and the other thing. We'll bring him right back. You know what I'm saying? Wasn't just running the streets, right? But it's just a few doors down. So I was very young and impressionable age, and there was a pawn shop on the block. I just remember just looking at all these shiny instruments and everything, like as if they were candy. What is going on? You know what I mean? The whole thing just fascinated me day one. So the first time I really saw a live band and performance, my mother and my aunt took me to an afternoon matinee screening of a movie called Mighty Joe Young, which spin off King Kong.
Yeah, I remember that. Like, I always got that mixed up too. Like, wait, is that King Kong?
Anyway, so they took me to see this movie, and before the feature started, there was a matinee with Lionel Hampton and his orchestra, his big swing orchestra performing. Right,
Wow.
that really just I flipped my wig, because I'd never been in that environment with live band with all these horns, and the whole thing was just overwhelming. And the story goes is that I was just jitterbugging out in the aisle. Kids would just bug out, right? And I was doing my thing, and apparently there was another little girl further down the theater doing the same thing, and Lionel Hampton came and kind of scooped us both up and put us up on the bandstand, on the stage above the bandstand, so we could dance together.
That's
And
so cool.
of course, the audience went off, so that was my first exposure to like applause and the whole thing, you know what I mean? And it was just another thing, like, man, who would have thought, But all of those memories kind of come flooding back to my dad, my upbringing around that barbershop and that nightclub.
I have to ask this, especially mentioning all those artists and like who your dad knew. Did you ever go to Dolphins of Hollywood? Because it was off of Central and Vernon, like for a long time.
Too young to do any sort of clubbing or anything like that.
Oh,
Because, like I said, when I
that was a
left,
record store though, but I think they had in stores or whatnot.
no. That, like I said, that was. I mean, I wasn't driving or anything like that. I was too young. I literally was just when I left California, I was about 13.
Wow. And
I was the Watch Riot happened in '65, right? So
man,
when all that jumped off, what happened in Orlando in a nutshell was that the aftermath of the riot kind of decimated all the commercial infrastructure in South Central.
wow.
All of it was huge. It was much bigger. It was a much bigger destruction than the riot in 1995.
Yeah, I remember like some cats were saying, and of course you go to Watts even now, like, yeah, they're doing some things now, but for the longest, there's a lot of places that still were in rubble from that riot. Like it's just like it never really recovered from it. And then that's what some cats that I even, even in reading about that, they're all, yeah, and the cats that live there, it still kind of never really recovered.
no,
And it's a trip just hearing about it from you too.
yeah, it was a pretty traumatic experience, having that occurrence, especially at a young age, because part of it was like exciting, because you got like fire trucks and helicopters and military vehicles and heavy artillery like moving into the neighborhood like a Godzilla movie or something. It was dramatic. It was crazy. Then for a few days they had like martial law where you weren't allowed to be caught out in the street without being subject to arrest or being shot on sight, so to speak, because looting was so aggressive and everything. And there's black people. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
whole confluence of military anxiety behind that situation. But as a kid, You know, I'm just stuff because you got to put it in context, right? I mean, there's only 3 TV stations at that time, the 3 networks, maybe 2 or 3 like local spinoffs like Channel 9. You know, I can't even remember the call letters of all those things, but television was very, very, very specific, you know. But it being Los Angeles and Los Angeles being a media, you have to understand that that riot like permeated and preempted like all broadcast. So it was
Yeah.
literally in a twilight zone, you know, for like several days because 24/7, really all you were really being programmed the riot, the riot, the riot, riot. And so in the aftermath of that, all the grocery stores, drugstores, clothing stores, hardware stores, department stores, you know, everything that you and I would normally take for granted as part of you know, municipal environment was just gone. So
Wow.
what resulted in that was the phenomenon that they call, you know, white flight, so to speak.
Yeah.
Diversity dissipated because, you know, people Caucasian, Asian. I mean, I had a whole melting pot of different ethnicities. Literally, I had a white babysitter when I was a kid.
Hmm.
One of my best buddies was an older German, you know, carpenter, you know, named Mr. Colby, and he would just, you know, let me like go around in his workshop with him. You know what I'm saying? Hammer nails and saw pieces of wood. You know what I'm, little kids. You know what I'm saying? So my point was there was I I was not raised with any degree of like racial anxiety from my parents. Like they never were like, oh, you know, like be leery of this person or those people. Were, you know, you never heard that sort of chatter because they were both from the deep South. My dad was from Natchez, Mississippi. My mother was from um, Wichita Falls, right? And you know, they were young enough to where they were kind of looking for, you know, the next wave, like, you know, black opportunity, so to speak, stepping outside of the Jim Crow
Yeah.
system, you know, that was still prevalent in the South, right? And I think they were actually pretty wise, like, not to give me that sense of paranoia or anxiety or agitation about other ethnicities because they saw that they were moving into a different arena and they just wanted to kind of put me in a mindset that was a lot more relaxed and more humanistic, you know, because that was the
Wow.
whole California, right? That
Yeah.
it was ostensibly you were thinking like you're moving, you know, to a new era of opportunity, so to speak. But see, the thing about it was the irony of all that was the police department of Los Angeles was extremely racist, right? Like
Yep.
pre I wish I could quote the chief of police's name from while I was there, but he was basically, you know, recruiting like guys from ex-military South that had Ku Klux affiliations and things of that nature. You know what I'm saying? He had this agenda already kind of firmly in place, and we knew just growing up that you know that the police were not anything to play with. You know what I'm saying? And you didn't want to definitely be caught at dark on the wrong side of a situation with police involved because they would just, you know, they would ride the king on the regular. That was like a common occurrence. It wasn't a freak accident that they caught somebody, like, you know what I'm saying, in the 90s with activity. It was commonplace, you know, when I was growing up in the 60s, you know, knew that the cops were like vicious.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw a lot of stuff like that even as a kid growing up in the 80s and 90s. You know, like, and it's the reason. And like my parents are like your parents. You know, like I was always brought up to respect everybody. But, you know, a lot of the stuff that I've experienced is more on the outside of my house, especially when it came to police and just even though there's another situation where they busted in my house. That's a whole nother story, but I understand exactly how you feel. People don't understand. And what you mentioned about like a lot of these police officers being recruited from the South, like seriously, like that stuff even still pervaded in the 80s where, I mean, I live in Long Beach. When I was a little kid, I remember when Ron Settles got lynched, when he got killed. That was the first time I even heard that in the news. But before that, people that I knew and loved, I remember them getting beat by police officers and stuff like that. I'm a little kid. Like this is like early 80s, you know, I was born in the 70s. And I remember a lot of that stuff. So people act like, oh, you're just being informed by the news. No, I'm being informed by my life experiences with this. People don't understand how systematic racism is and how much areas of activity that stuff is in there. And even with that, like my parents, they still like raised me that way too. And so I totally understand what you're saying, you know. I didn't mean to go all off, but yeah.
That's fine, but that's kind of the stimuli forms your decisions, you know, as you go into adolescence, so to speak. You know what I mean? It's like there's a very short learning curve from elementary school to junior high school, and then a curve from junior high school. It's what we call street knowledge, right?
Yep.
You know, but my dad was always very transparent, you know, even with his activity. Because, I mean, it wasn't like he was like a vicious gangster or something like that. It wasn't like he was running drugs, something like that. You know,
Yeah.
he was a hustle, you know. So we'd spend a lot of time together at the racetrack, you know, at Hollywood Park, or Caliente down in Tijuana, you know what I mean, at horse races, you know. And so he kind of raised me with what I call a streetwise sensibility, you know. So I tell people I've been pretty cool since I was about 5 or 6, you know. You know what I'm saying? With hip street people, you know. And it wasn't like my dad was negligent or you know just taking me for granted with exposing me to these other things that other people might consider to be inappropriate. You know, it's just reality, right? And I guess he just kind of wanted to get me in sync with what time it is, you know,
Yeah.
because we still went to church and we were still, you know, what we called, you know, militant about school, education, grades, the whole nine, you know. But my dad wanted to do well for us. My mom wanted to do well for us. They were both young, vivacious, black parents, you know what I'm saying? And so everything was kind of upwardly mobile for the longest time. You know, I remember us pretty much being well off in terms of like not ever having any scarcity of food or clothing or furniture or any of those things. It was always about to come up, keeping up with the Jones, keeping up appearances, you know, had a nice yard, 2 cars in the driveway, you know, furniture was always crisp. And I stayed sharp, like with clothes, you know what I'm saying? Because my mother was like totally into that. And that was something, the thing about, you know, uh, just taking pride in your appearance, and my dad being a barber, obviously, you know what I'm saying,
Yeah. Hooked you up, man.
right? And so I grew up with that real good sense of self-esteem. I think being the oldest or the firstborn in a large family of uncles and aunts, you know what I'm saying? I got a lot of love for being, you know, that kid, you know what I mean? And I had other little cousins and everything around there. Like, because my dad was like the youngest of 14.
Oh wow, man, that's like my mom. Youngest, well, she was the oldest girl of 10. Those old school black families, man.
Buku, uncles, aunts, cousins, you know, the whole nine, you know, and you know, it was a very loving, I had a very loving, nurturing, supported upbringing.
Wow.
But riot, that financial dissipation, that financial collapse, you know, really affected my dad's ability to earn and thrive, you know, and he got into an alcohol thing and it just eroded, you know, the trust between him and my mother. And my mother said, like, you know, she just got to a point where she just wasn't feeling it, you know, and she wanted to take care of us. And I'm the oldest of four, right?
Wow.
He basically made the move to take my three younger siblings back to her home base with her, uh, mother in Wichita Falls, and just kind of reset her trajectory, which is common. I was going to try to stay in LA with my dad, but then he contracted tuberculosis.
Oh, wow.
You in a quarantine setting to treat tuberculosis because it was a highly contagious disease, right? So rather than me, try to muddle through school with an uncle or an aunt, which I probably could have done, my mother sent me basically a letter saying, look, on the real side of things, I could use your help, just as an extra pair of hands in this household. And, I want you to have an exposure to more responsibility, and I will help you get a drum set.
Oh,
And bing, when
wow.
check that box, kind of like the magic word, that kind of put me in that trajectory. So I came to Texas. But when I came to Texas, I realized that the city of Wichita Falls at that time was segregated.
That's what I was gonna ask you. Like, so how was it coming from LA to Texas, especially from like the Berlin Wall?
Shot because that city was segregated, right? And the kids in the black community weren't quite as, let's say, well read or sophisticated as I had, because I had early exposure to like the Black Panthers in the breakfast school programs. We could stop off, you know what I'm saying, and get a little bowl of cornflakes or oatmeal, whatever, and then they talk to you about Africa and this, that, and the other thing, and let you know, like you're from a generation of kings, you know what I mean? Like the whole Black Pride thing was in full effect with us, and starting to peep what was going on a little bit later, like when the FBI really started coming down on the Black Panther Party, and they started their whole, COINTELPRO situation out in,
Yeah.
saying, Ray Orlando, I easily say that I believe God sees everything, you know what I'm saying? And he kind of like set my path, and these series of events transpired, he kind of kept the shield on me. Could have so very easily, stayed behind, up, in the trap. You dig what I mean? Because that whole situation in the 80s was vicious. I lost a whole bunch of cousins, in the process of the blood crip conflagrations and,
Whoa. Oh.
spontaneous lives, let alone what transpired with the crack epidemic and all that stuff when it popped off. But that's another sidebar.
Yeah, Rod Core was talking about that last night, man. Man, there's a lot of parallels. Man, that's a trip.
But the situation where it's like now, I'm kind of flying without a net, right? Because everything is in a throwback mode. You dig? And what I did understand was that black community in Wichita Falls was very tight knit. Like literally, everybody knew everybody, and everybody pretty much cared about everybody. There wasn't like a whole lot of static. There wasn't like that territorial static, that you would experience in, with, sloths versus businessmen versus gladiators versus, whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like you had to learn, like you had to live conscientious of your turf, like where you were at any given point, especially if you were on a bike, like rolling around, like we would do, like after school, just rolling. You start riding, you know what I mean? You get into the ride and you forget, oh, I'm across some boundaries. So, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Let me get back over here.
Who's your people, like that sort of thing, right? And I saw enough of that to know, you dig? But going back to Wichita Falls, that situation where it was just a specific, what I call a demographic, to where you knew the black community was on the struggle tip, like for real, right?
Wow.
And ironic about Wichita Falls, without me dragging on about it, was that it was a town of about 100,000 people, right? That town of 100,000 people had one of the highest per capita demographics of millionaires of
Oh,
any in the United States because you had a huge ratio of what we call uneducated people grown up like on ranches that had gas reserves, oil gas reserves like on their property. So it was kind of like some Beverly Hillbilly instant millionaire
that's funny. Oh, wow.
because these cats, you know, these people are like ranchers, raising, you know, horses and cattle and whatnot, you know, for the large part, but they just happen to have like large reservoirs of natural gas on their property or large reservoirs of natural petroleum on their property. So that area was like full of these kind of redneck, nouveau riche, not necessarily sophisticated, not necessarily educated at all, right? Really, really to be in a environment like that because of course you did what called proletariat, the middle class, you know, people that were just kind of, you know, working 9 to 5s and getting by this, that, and the other thing. But when my mother got a job in Wichita Falls, she worked for a Walgreens drugstore. She was the first African American cashier that had ever been in a store downtown.
Wow. That's a trip. That's a trip. That's a trip.
You know what I mean?
That's a trip.
With,
Man, I mean, shoot, you wonder how, like, I wonder what she went through even being that first, you know, like, that's,
yeah, blue collar position that you and I would just definitely take for granted as being, you know, nothing to write home about. You know what I'm saying? It was like she made like the news.
wow. Man.
But my mother be built for it, meaning that she, you know, she was an attractive lady and she had been working in public and she, you know, she knew how to conduct herself and she knew how to, you know what I mean? She knew how
Yeah.
to basically navigate that terrain in a way where she didn't have to clown, the, you know what I'm saying, step outside of her dignity, you know what I'm saying, to do the job because she wasn't taking no diss. You weren't going to just be rolling up on her in any sort of way. You know what I mean? She was very confident. You know what I'm saying? And so, therefore, my point was um, to kind of make a long story short, I came to Wichita Falls with a can do attitude.
Hmm.
I wasn't going to there and be like marginalized, like, oh, well, I can't go here, I can't go over there, I can't do this, I can't do that. Because I was more concerned about helping my mother the best that I could and then getting that drum set. That was the two, those are my priorities.
Heck yeah. Did you play drums before I mean prior to Texas? Like did you ever I mean were you playing drums even before that?
The thing was, I had classical musical training in middle school. We started in school and elementary school. By the fifth and sixth grade, I was already playing like clarinet and oboe.
Wow.
So I could sight read because I had formal music. And back in those days, you know, they encouraged musical training, whether you had any aptitude for it or not. They were just going to give you exposure.
Man, that's so cool.
You had, you know, a talent or an interest in it, right? They at least gave you an opportunity to put your hands on an instrument. And of course, everybody wanted to play drums. That's all I could say about that, you know. So no, I never got a chance to play drums when I was like in the in the orchestral program, except if I was in the lab, you know, no other kids were there, and I'd like, you know, beat on the temp, whatever, you know what I'm saying. But I wasn't supposed to do that.
Wow.
But the situation was when the Beatles came out, you know, it shifted a gear, right? When the British invasion happened in '64, 11, you know what I mean? And I'm just caught up Everybody.
Oh man, you're cutting out, man. I'm sorry. Can you say that again? You kind of cut out a little bit.
No, I'm just saying, when the Beatles came out and the British invasion started in '64, right? I just got caught up in the wave of that, just like every other kid, because it was just a brand new, fresh, exciting thing, you know? And I wasn't thinking about it. As a matter of fact, it really wasn't hard for me. I'll say this, it wasn't hard for me to get into the first wave of the British invasion because so many of those British bands were like really, they were promoting black music.
Yep. Covered a lot of black musicians. I mean, shoot. The Beatles definitely, I mean, we know like that was, you know, the Isley Brothers, Twist and Shout, and man, all those bands too, they got their names. Like, I mean, look at the Rolling Stones, you know, like, and just, you know, like freaking the Yardbirds are covering like I'm a Man and all that stuff, you know, I mean, I like a lot of stuff from that era too, you know.
No, it was awesome, but you know, you just have to remember the wave of it, you know, was really like a sea change, right?
Mm.
Because up to that point, it had always been pretty much, you know, well, the Motown thing had already really started to roll, but we're talking about '64, right? So it had just started to roll. You know, it wasn't like in totally high gear as it would be '65, '66, '67, right? Everything was just kind of like in a, what I call at a boiling point, right? Like
Wow.
starting to break in a huge national way, you know what I'm saying, with like Night Train and all of that, I'm saying. And that's before, you know, then you have American bands, like theoretically, like your only kind of exposure, that your crystal ball to see like really what was coast to coast with the new music. And of course, the radio stations were primarily AM radio stations, so they were really it was actually a pretty homogenous format, the way that they were, you know, releasing R&B and rock and roll and country and western all the same stream, right?
Hmm.
So I can remember being a little kid and I'm listening to, you know, Jackie Wilson, the Everly Brothers, the Rolling Stones, Diana Ross and the Supremes, you know, and then all sorts of corny music, you know, like Flying Purple People Eater and, you know, Beanie, the Eeny Weeny Bikini or whatever. You know, it was
All
like,
that bubblegum pop stuff.
but that's just the flavor of the era. You know what I'm saying? So you're digesting it all like it's just a big smorgasbord, you know, which was really great. And then by the same token, you know, you have like American Bandstand, and you had like Ed Sullivan. Everything like stopped for like 7 o'clock on Sunday because Ed Sullivan was coming on. 9 times out of 10, that's going to be pretty much the only place where you're going to see like black performers in a really great setting. You know what I'm saying? With a great production
Man,
value. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, you fixate on these things like, and they make a really strong impression on you, right? But you know, we had that sort of thing going on juxtaposed to the civil rights movement, where like, where you're watching like the struggles in Birmingham and Memphis and Tuscaloosa and all these places, you know, where still the situation with, you know, Connor and the German Shepherds and the host and the whole thing, you know what I'm saying? And as a little kid, you're kind of, you know, it's confusing, right? Because I mean, you're seeing it, you see what it is, but it hasn't really rolled up on you yet. You
man,
know what I mean? But it's literally, you know, it's it's in your perspective, right? You got that as a perspective, and then you move up to like 1968, King gets assassinated,
man.
right?
Lord have mercy.
And everything started to take a dramatic shift. You know what I mean? Because then from that point going forward, the music got a lot more socially conscious, you know. And now you got Sly and the Family Stone coming up. And of course, Jimi Hendrix really starting to make huge impact as far as in the spectrum of like the white popular music zeitgeist. You know, he became this looming figure on the horizon. Now he's starting to move into the same spaces like the Beatles and the Who and the Rolling Stones, that sort of thing. Black people really didn't understand what Jimi Hendrix was about when he came out, so he wasn't popular in the black community. He caught my attention because he looked a lot like my dad.
Wow.
I just had like a physical connection, you know, with just his image, you know. But of course, I mean, let's not get it twisted. When I first listened, the first time I listened to Are You Experienced, I really wasn't sure what I was hearing. I just, about a month where I could really like sort out sonically, like, what am I listening to? Because it was literally like a thrill ride, you know? It was like the idea of putting on a blindfold and jumping on a roller coaster blindfold, right?
Man.
Like, it's so
No.
far afield from everything else that was happening in the so-called realm of music. You know what I mean?
Man.
And then really, he didn't do television the way that the normal circuit of, like, you know, new music artists would normally kind of run the junket, you know, and they'd be like whatever, they'd be on Ed Sullivan, and they'd be on whatever Steve Martin, or they'd be on the Dean Martin show or whatever, you know, these different variety shows like the Smart Brothers or whatever have
Yeah.
you. Over time, you know, you start to see a lot of these alternative British acts kind of making their inroads in some of these variety shows, and it was always perceived as kind of like a freak show. So if you saw like the Who on the Smothers Brothers, and they did their
Oh
whole
man.
set off smoke bombs and the whole 9 yards, you know, everybody was just looking, standing around his shop, going like, "What?"
Explosion. When you saw that as a drummer, like, what did that kind of be like, wow.
It was totally wow, you know, like everything was wow, is what I'm trying to tell you, Orlando. It's like everything about it all was wow. Like, you know, people talk about the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, but the band that really kind of captured my fascination was called the Dave Clark Five, right? Because
Awesome. Yeah, those guys.
they had a drummer up front. The drummer was like the main. He was Dave Clark, right? So his drum kit, as opposed to being up on the riser in the back, was up front. And
Man.
he was the first drum kit I saw that was playing using a double bass setup, like a double bass drum setup, right? And that just struck me as like, wow, that is cool. Plus he was a singing drummer, you know, and sort of the thing that I kind of fixated on. And then, of course, a little while later down the road, as I got deeper and deeper, because you have to understand, you know, you had to literally like do your own research and dig in the crates. You'd go to, you know, department stores, drug stores, or whatever, wherever they sold records. This is before Tower Records or anything was like a really big compendium of music. They used, you know, records used to be like, I don't know, $2.99 or $3.99 an album, right?
Man.
And they had relatively short shelf lives. You know what I'm saying? And it would only take, you know, 2 or 3 months before it went into the so-called cutout bins, where you get the album for like 69 cents or 79 cents. You know,
Like, come up, it's a come up.
well, all I can tell you is the thing that fascinated me about that era was the fact that the concept of like graphic design had made it to the
The
point.
album cover.
The album were artwork, and literally were becoming like really in enhanced, or let's tranced by the packaging, you know, of what the thing was. And I was buying records just because they look cool. I didn't even know what the music was. You know what I mean? Was Pink Floyd or the Nice or the Moody Blues or, you know, whatever have you. You know what I'm saying? I was just looking at them practically like bubblegum cards. You know what I mean? Like, man, this thing here, this Cream album looks really awesome. You know what I mean?
Really gears.
Yeah, I mean, I'm being honest. The first time when I looked at, going back to Are You Experienced, when I looked at Jimi Hendrix, I wasn't really sure if he was black, Mexican, or what.
That's a trip.
I really, and it didn't really matter. You know what I'm saying? Because he looks so different than everybody else in terms of like the British bands. You know.
Yeah.
It's because it was still like back in those days, the bands were still kind of pretty much on a suit and tie type tip. You know what I'm saying?
The mod thing.
Stones dressed a little looser than the Beatles. They'd wear sweaters or T-shirts or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Or sweatshirts. The Beatles stayed pretty much fly because they were in uniform, like pretty much for their first 3 albums. You know what I'm saying? They were like the Beatles. It was a brand thing. Of course, that was the first time you saw that mass market branding where all of a sudden the Beatles were branding like everything that wasn't nailed down, like lunch boxes, you know, saucers, coffee cups. Every Beatle merchandise was just everywhere, like pillowcases, shower curtains.
Beatlemania, man. That was a real Beatlemania.
So all I'm just saying was that it took a minute before the social changes in the zeitgeist had really started to permeate the consciousness of the black communities. So by the time when you saw Sly and the Family Stone start to come up, that was another big shift, right? Because they came out with this presentation that was like multiracial, multigender, and the music was pop, but it was also funky.
Yeah.
It was also, and it had that vibrant, like gospel vocal energy, right? That we all could connect to like instantaneously. Plus the messaging was so cool. Like, you know, when you got in everyday people, right? That was something that everybody could get with, because what it was saying was everything is everything. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You had this where it's like you had that going on, and then not long thereafter, here comes the Jackson 5.
Wow.
Right? Who basically where Motown had kind of like taken a cue from Sly and the Family Stone and said, "Oh, we'll take that sort of, you know, presentation. Maybe we'll inject that sort of hippie ability into this young group of young black, this phenomenon, you know, named Michael Jackson, who's like whatever 6 or 7 years old.
Man,
you know what?
That's a trip.
But they had the songs. It was, and this is where I'm trying to say there was like a gradual bridge to where the hippie counterculture started to merge into the presentation of the black soul and funk community. Like the black culture started to pick up on that with the bell bottoms and the, you know, the really big black shirts and the, you know, the really vibrant psychedelic colors and prints. So by the time you got to like, you know, the Temptations doing like psychedelic Shack.
That song is hard. And Cloud 9, that song's, oh man. Shouts to Rod for I see you, homeboy.
You know
yeah,
I mean?
Man. Yeah, that's, I like that era.
Section that was happening like at an accelerated pace because, you know, like, believe it or not, it's like all those people in Motown were clocking like Jimi Hendrix and Sly like very, very closely. They were watching, you know what I'm saying? Because Hendrix kept escalating, right? It's like he made the splash in Monterey with setting the guitar on fire. That made like network news, right? That was like a spaceship or something. Like, you know, live on stage, this wild man just set his guitar on fire, and nobody had ever seen anything.
My dad saw that. He saw that. He went to the Monterey Pop, and he was telling me, he's like, yeah, man, it was wild. I'm like, wow. I could only live vicariously through you and him. I'm like, man, I wish I saw that.
I mean, to this day, I still revisit. Like they have the documentaries on Monterey Pop, and they've got the documentary on Jimmy at Monterey, and it's really fascinating to me how he literally had pulled off this masterful feat. Like coming into this arena, having cut his teeth in England and basically conquering Europe. By the time he got to Monterey, his game was on 10 because he had played over 200 shows.
Man.
And that's the thing that's the other thing. Just to fast forward, that's the thing that kind of annoys me about the perception of the legacy of Jimi Hendrix, of him being kind of in this fog of like drug abuse and so on and so forth. I mean, I know that he was definitely indulging in this, that, and the other thing, but the fact that he was such a tremendous workaholic, is the
Yep.
thing that kind of sidestep, you know what I'm saying? Because you got to think about, first of all, technically, like what he was able to achieve inside of like a 4-year window. He literally like reshaped the sound and the approach of the guitars like single-handedly in an era
Yep.
was that was really prolific with like really powerful and dynamic guitar innovators. When you're talking about in the same era as Clapton, Beck, and Page, and Peter Townsend, right? Not to mention people like Rory Gallagher,
Yeah.
Les,
Oh man, you're
John
cutting out. Say those two names again after Rory Gallagher.
Leslie West
Oh yeah,
from Mountain,
Mountain.
Johnny Winter, Santana. I mean
Robert
that.
Fripp.
With like really powerful, dynamic, innovative. Peter Green, from Fleetwood Mac,
Yeah. Rest in peace. Yep.
and then I mean, the Fleetwood Mac was kind of like the precursors to Billy Gibbons and ZZ Top. You know what I'm saying? Like, anyway, my point
Oh no,
was,
I'm feeling that, man. I'm glad that you're telling cats about that. A lot of people don't know. And I was telling my sister about Fleetwood Mac before they got Lindsay and Stevie, and Peter Green. He's still underrated till this day, in my opinion.
no, Fleetwood Mac were like a heavyweight influential band when he was the lead singer. They were like a hard progressive blues band. A lot of people don't know that Peter Green wrote Black Magic Woman, like the song that Santana made
I didn't
famous.
know that.
But Mac did that. Peter Green wrote that Black Magic Woman.
Man, what did you say, Rockcore? I thought it was just cut out sometimes on his end. Oh man, are you talking about the voice thing? Yeah, IG's probably tripping, man. I don't even know what's going on. Sometimes it cuts out. Man, we're hopefully like it won't be doing that no more. But man, I don't know. But man, but yeah, all those guys are awesome, man. Like I think that period is like that's my favorite. That influenced me as a musician when I got into it. As a matter of fact, it's Jimi Hendrix is the reason that I picked up a guitar. I'm probably about 11 to 12 years old watching TV, and this is in the mid '80s. So I'm like probably like in the 6th grade, 5th to 6th grade. I see this man on the guitar, and I'm like, what? And I'm like, I want to do that. Like that. When I saw him, the audio side. Yeah, I don't even know. They saying it's cutting out. Yeah, it's kind of cutting out here and there.
I can hear you just fine. So
They're
you
saying
can.
it's like kind of on your side that like it keeps cutting out.
I don't know.
I don't know what's going on.
Hang on a second.
But man, yeah, he blew my mind, man. Even as a kid in the '80s, after he passed, like, so I could only imagine what it was like in the time that you're talking about, like just hearing him for the first time, and that's when a lot of cats were hearing him. Totally game changer. And I forget, there's a brother that said it is a guitar before Jimi Hendrix and then after Jimi Hendrix, like guitar playing wise. Like it changed the game,
Well, he
you know?
came to Texas a lot, while he was active, Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. No, I'm just saying Hendrix came to Texas a lot. He influenced a lot of Texas guitar players right along because he had such a strong blues hand. You know what I mean? Uh, Without going into a deeper excursion, you just got to bear in mind, like, Texas was a veritable hotbed of, like, really strong progressive guitar players, and when you're talking about people like Albert Collins from Houston and people like Lightning Hopkins, and you're talking about, you know, people like Freddie King
Mm.
that were like, well, T-Bone Walker. T-Bone Walker was essentially Jimi Hendrix before Jimi Hendrix in
Yeah,
the
he,
40s.
he he lifted a lot of moves. Then wasn't he the first to play the guitar with his teeth too?
Well,
T-Bone Walker.
I would say he's the first, but I'm sure he was one of the first that made it like popular sort of thing. Because my point was he played with a lot of histrionics, what we call, like, when you're doing the splits and playing the guitar behind your
That's
head,
right.
playing the guitar behind your back. A lot of guitar players could and would do those things because it was just kind of like, it just kind of like sweetened the pot, you know, get more people to your gigs, if you had a little bit of showmanship, you know what I'm saying? And some people were like, Guitar Slim was another cat that was like really into that, um, the guitar showmanship, Buddy Guy did it,
Man,
you know what I'm saying? Yeah, man.
Buddy is no joke, man. That dude, beast, man.
Yeah,
So
but my point was just that in the '60s, Hendrix coming through Texas created like a complete sea change, right? Because
wow.
that's when everybody started to make the shift to the three-piece presentation. When the Experience came through, that's when Johnny Winter decided he wanted to have a three-piece outfit. See, when Johnny he was discovered here in Austin by a journalist named Chet Flippo that was doing an article on another Texas artist named Doug Stamm, who had a group called the Sir Douglas Quartet, right?
Huh.
And Doug Stamm happened to have this journalist stop by this place called Vulcan Gas Company to see Johnny Winter because he's like, hey man, this is cat that you got to see before you go back to New York, because he's just awesome. And sure enough, the guy saw Johnny Winter, and Johnny Winter being an albino, he had long hair down to his waist, so he wrote this article that essentially paraphrased. He said, well, I just saw this guy that looks like a ghost, and he sings and plays faster than Eric Clapton.
Wow.
Like, right. Which all of that was pretty true. Yeah. Well, there was this guy named Steve Paul, who was a club owner in New York City, who was a club owner and a slash promoter, had read this article, and he was like, I got to see if that's real. So he came to Texas to see Johnny Winter for himself. And when he did, he tried to convince Johnny back to New York City. Johnny was skeptical, because he was like, well, I don't know this guy from a can of paint, why do I want to go all the way back to New York? He's like, well, what's it going to take for you to get back to New York with me? He's like, well, Johnny said something to the effect of, if you can book me at the Fillmore East with either B.B. King, Albert King, Fred King, I'd consider it, that sort of thing. So the guy did know Bill Ham. I mean, he did know Bill Graham from the Fillmore, and Bill Graham put Johnny Winter on a bill with Albert King. And in the interim time that the booked and Johnny Winter came to play, this guy Steve Paul had gone around to all these major labels and showed them a videotape that he had shot of Johnny Winter, like on a small movie camera, you know. A bit broke out, and that's what resulted in Johnny Winter getting like the highest advance for a recording artist in history when he was signed in 1968. He
Wow.
signed,
You said a fight broke out?
huh?
You said what broke out?
A bidding war,
Oh, wow. Wow.
a bidding war among the major labels.
Yeah.
So he wound up getting a $600,000 deal.
Man.
68. And the same bass player in his group was my friend Tommy Shannon, who later became the bass player with Stevie Ray Vaughan and Double Trouble.
Man.
So that's how I know these things, because Tommy had told me all these things like from the firsthand experience. They literally went from to like a 7-room mansion in Connecticut like overnight. But those
That's
are the days.
insane.
They're really great things.
Oops, you cutting out again, man. I don't know what's going on. Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Sorry.
All right. Well, look, it's been about an hour. So if you want to give me something that I can wrap up with you.
Oh man. Like I said, I'm cool either way. Like there's so like I wanted to get into your bands, and you mentioned the 3-piece. Um, Man, not unless you have to go, and we can do it another time, because I really wanted to get more into like your bands and the stuff that you're doing with the kids in school and all that, and you know, whatever's cool with you, man.
I think,
Um, but
we
like,
should part, and maybe part 3 for that matter. You know what I mean? Like we could break it up over a series, so to speak, because literally, I mean, that's a lot of
I
ground to
know.
cover in a real.
I was wondering, like, it even, like even when I have a lot of questions, and there's a lot of you have a lot of history, man, and the fact that no one really hears about Texas is funny. We were talking over the phone about like bands like Blood Rock and all those guys from Texas and stuff like that, and Trapeze, even though they're not from Texas, but you guys would play with them. I was, you know, even bands like punk bands like the Huns, you know, from Austin. And I was going to ask you if you played with any of those bands, but also I know like I have an, you know, Texas you don't really hear much about, you know, like even like my friends in a band called The Hates from Houston, but like you were like the beginning of a lot of that stuff. So man, if you want to continue this another time, that's cool, you know, like, because I know there's a lot I wanted to talk about you founding the BRC, the Black Rock Coalition, as well. There's a lot of things that we can go over. If you want, we can part 2 it, if you know, because I know it's like I'm cool either way.
Yeah, really. You should think about part 2. You should think about part 2 and 3, because I'm telling you, you'll really get a better series of. You know what I'm saying? If you take the time and kind of like put your questionnaire together, and then we
Oh
kind of go
no,
on.
I have all my questions, like I have them all, but like I know like you have a lot of stuff that I didn't even realize an hour went by. But we'll continue it again. I mean, seriously, like I mean, I got tons of questions,
Okay,
man.
I'm here for it, man. So thanks so much for inviting me along, and I look forward to picking up the conversation on the flip side. Okay.
Most def. And we got people in the audience. We got Rod Core, who we had last night. Shouts to you. We got Mark Edwards, who we had on our second Black History of Rock and Roll. These guys are amazing musicians as well. And man, all you guys have some really cool stuff in common. You guys are all icons to me personally. I really appreciate you guys, man. And I appreciate you taking the time.
Game to you, bro. What you should really consider, right, is trying to set up some sort of panel event at South by Southwest, right?
Wow.
Basically, see if you can kind of get a menagerie of like some of your movers and shakers to come to the table, and let's kick it in real time. You know what I'm saying? Because that's something that you really you have a great uh, capacity to bring people together that way, and I think that would be a great vehicle, you know, to kind of expand your initiative in a way that has some international impact.
Man, well, shoot, I'm probably going to be asking for your help on that. I mean, I'm doing what I can, you know, and I really appreciate the fact that of what you've done, man, and it's why, like, yeah, let's make a part two to this, man.
Okay.
And I appreciate that. I really appreciated it. Rodcore is giving the yeah, man. Man, you guys are like, I'm feeling all like humbled. Like, seriously, man. Because I mean, wow.
Your initiative, because I really respect the hustle. You know, I respect the initiative. I know it's coming from a genuine place, and it's an initiative that's sorely needed. You know, so if you have the time and the energy, you know, to continue to advance it, I'm here to support you, bro.
Yeah, man. Man, yeah, let's talk about that. I'm just doing, you know, I'm doing what I have. So I mean, shoot, anything that I could step this up to, I'm down, and like I'm down for that, you know, like, man. But let's do a part two, please. I'm asking, like, let's do a part two of this, because I want to get into the bands, and I also want to get into your work with the BRC, and your work with your own organization, Dubois. I don't know if I'm saying that right. And just the stuff that you're doing with the kids.
Yeah, Dubois Limited. That's my artist development enterprise. I founded that back in 2013, and it's basically a situation where I provide, you know, meaningful consultation to like aspiring and in some cases actually successful artists. You know what I'm saying? That just kind of need to figure out a way to take another step or get around a corner or a blockade. You know, because I always kind of look at things from a slightly different perspective than the person that's in the eye of the hurricane, so to speak. So I've had a good run with that, and we can certainly talk more about a lot of the peripheral things, especially on the education tip. So just look at your calendar, circle back to me. You know, I'm just a text away. Just get at me. You know what I'm saying, and we'll set it up, and theoretically we'll get off to another smooth start, and we'll get further down the road next time. Okay.
Thanks a lot. I really appreciate you taking your time out, man. Like, this is more than an honor, like, seriously. And I know we've talked over the phone, which was also cool too, you know. And you always give me the history and perspective of a lot of the things that went between, like, the what people would call the advent of rock and roll to the transitional phase of it becoming more psychedelic, and into the heavier stuff that, you know, that's what I think is really important, and even you giving us what you gave us today is even showing that, because people still think that a lot of these roots are gone, but they're not. I even tell people I listen to death metal, I still hear the roots. I mean, people might think I'm crazy saying that, but I still hear it, you know.
Oh well, you know, I mean, it's music, bro. You know what I'm saying? There's interstitial ties to the ancestors
Mm.
if you just not listen. You dig what I mean? The main thing is just to kind of keep your mind open and keep your heart open and just kind of appreciate things with the beauty that they're intended to be received, you know, not to get into what I call compartmentalization and judgment about genre specificity or this, that, and the other thing, because that puts things into what I call a blockade, right? You want to kind of be amorphous, like water, right?
Yeah.
If you just flow, you know what I'm saying? You'll eventually places that you didn't even envision yourself being prior to the experience. So it's kind of like that. To me, that's that's the core aesthetic of the jazz mind, right? It's to where you just kind of you got to like you don't like think about things in such a heavy terrestrial way. You got to think of them more on a cosmic plane, you know. And then once you kind of get into once you got to get you kind of get into that space of what like Wayne Shorter would call like zero gravity, right? That's when the magic happens.
True. Mark, you should check out Mark's stuff. You know, he's played with Cecil Taylor and David S. Ware. We talked about a lot of that stuff too, man. So yeah, we're all on the same page with that.
Cool.
You know, I love that stuff, man. Like, shoot. Well, man, we're gonna do this again, please. Like, we gotta have a part two. I'm asking. You know, like, that'd be rad.
Yeah, well, I got you, man. You let me know when, and we'll sort it out. Okay.
Most def. Thanks a lot. Thanks a
Back
lot.
to
Black History of Black History of Rock and Roll. Sorry, I tripped over my words. Black History of Rock and Roll. We got Bevis, Griffin in the house. And we're going to come back. We're going to come back. Shouts to you guys. I see you, Mark. I see you, Rod Core, and all the other cats that I've seen. Thanks again, Bevis. Really, seriously.
pleasure is mine, man. Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon.
Peace and blessings, man.
In a minute.
Most def.